Welcome to the Psychology Podcast, where we give you insights into the mind, brain, behavior, and creativity. I'm Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, and in each episode I have a conversation with a guest who will stimulate your mind and give you a greater understanding of yourself, others, and the world we live in. Hopefully we'll also provide a glimpse into human possibility. Thanks for listening and enjoy the podcast. Today, it's an honor to have Ryan Niemiec and Robert McGrath on the podcast. Ryan is an author or co-author of 9 books, an award-winning psychologist, international keynoter, and education director of the VIA Institute on Character. Robert is professor of psychology at Farleigh Dickinson University, senior scientist at the VIA Institute, and has published extensively in the topic of character and virtue. Together, they are author of the new book, The Power of Character Strengths: Appreciate and Ignite Your Positive Personality. Thanks so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks, Scott.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks, Scott.
I have a question. First of all, what is a positive personality? How do I know if I have a positive personality? Judged by who?
Well, I guess I would say that the idea of a positive personality has to do with, are you someone who has really committed yourself to trying to work as well as you can in the world with the people around you, developing yourself, and even contributing to your community? Are those things that are really important to you? And if so, there are certain strengths that are really helpful in terms of making that happen.
Yeah, and in this book, we focus on, to build off what Bob's saying, we build off these 24 character strengths that studies show are in people across cultures, nations, religions, belief systems. And these 24 character strengths they veer more toward the positive. They're naturally more positive for us, and they bring more positive outcomes for us or for other people. So they veer more toward the good. And, these are part of our personality.
So, the positive personality, is that like synonymous in your view with character? Like, do you use those two words synonymously?
I think that's a fair thing to say. So many times we are driven by the things that are going on around us that make us, decide to do the things we do. And positive personality is more about the stable part of who you are. That is someone who contributes, someone who is admirable and working effectively for themselves and for others. So yeah, I think that old word character really fits well with the modern idea of positive personality. As psychologists, we like to talk about personality. The philosophers tend to talk about character, but I really think that we talk about positive personality and character, we're really talking about the same things.
Okay, good. Thanks for that clarification. So you both have been studying scientifically a wide range of character strengths. I was wondering if you could just, one of you or both of you, but not at the same time, please just talk about the development of the measurement, the VIA instrument. Like, what is the instrument? And how was it developed? What are the origins of it?
Well, why don't I take that one? Because I'm probably most focused on the development issues.
Great.
So as Ryan said, we have these 24 character strengths, and it was a very long process. And Ryan can talk a little bit more about the kind of conceptual work that went on behind choosing these 24. But then it was recognized that for us to really make this a useful concept, you have to have some way of measuring it. And so Chris Peterson and Marty Seligman, who were the people who originally identified the 24 character strengths, immediately turned around and started developing a questionnaire. And that basically was a process of collecting items, various items that reflect each of the 24 character strengths, like creativity, kindness, and giving it to large groups of people and seeing which items held together well. And then, on the basis of that, choosing items for the questionnaire. One of the issues that you saw with that was that they originally chose 10 items for each of the 24 strengths, which meant it was 240 items long, which is a little long for people. I mean, it can take 40 minutes or longer to complete all 240. So one of the first things we did was cut it to 120 items, and that's the version that you'd see on the VIA website right now. But the other thing was that the whole field of measurement has really advanced over the years. And there are all sorts of methods that you can use to improve the quality of questionnaires. And so we completed a several year process of rethinking the whole questionnaire, rethinking the meanings of the strengths and how we wanted to represent each of them. And we've just finished up work on that and are in the middle of getting it translated into, I believe we're up to 14 languages where we're getting translations done. And once some of those major translations are done, we're going to be rolling out this new version on the website. And one of the things that's nice about it is it's going to be an even shorter version. It's going to be 96 items instead of 120. So we're trying to both maximize the quality of the questionnaire and also make it easier for people to finish it.
Cool. I mean, how many iterations, different versions has the scale existed over the years? Like, how different is it now from the very first version? Because I know there's been a lot of studies that have come out doing like very statistical analyses on the different factors and, how the things line up maybe differently from what was originally proposed. Like, how different is the scale now?
The one that people are doing right now online is really just the same as the original 240 item version. Every item comes from that original version, but it's just half as long. The new version, we have a bunch of new items. We found some problems with some of the scales. So, for example, leadership is one of the 24 character strengths. The items really didn't hold together that well, so we've revised a bunch of those items. Self-regulation, another one of the character strengths, we thought that there was too much of a focus on things like healthy habits and diet. And so we've really changed that scale a lot. So it's not a massive change, but there are new items that are going to be appearing in the next year or so. And like I said, more importantly, it's going to be a shorter, tighter scale than it was before.
Cool. Now, how many people have taken the test since the beginning?
So we're at over 7 million right now, people, and it's interesting if you get the average in terms of how many people might take it in a certain matter of seconds. We have somebody that takes the VIA survey every 15 seconds of every minute of every day. So just since we've been talking here, there have probably been, whatever that would mathematically be out to, another 50 people that have taken it from, somewhere in the world.
That is about the same number of people. How many in the world?
Over 7 million at this point.
My gosh, it's about the same number of listeners of the Psychology Podcast. I wonder what the overlap is. We have a lot of. We have a lot of.
Some. I tell you that.
We have a lot of listeners of the Psychology Podcast that are interested in positive psychology.
Well,
yeah, and what's so exciting about this is that the numbers we find continue to incline. They continue to increase year by year. So we find about a 25% increase every single year in the last 5 years. So it's not like, positive psychology or especially we're talking about these character strengths are kind of a passing fad and, they're kind of useful. And I remember way back then when it was interesting, but actually it's just gaining more and more traction in different fields, whether it's business or education or coaching or counseling or health or whatever. So that's particularly exciting to me is that incline year by year.
Very interesting. People are, what is it? They're hungry for self-knowledge, for maybe framing themselves in a positive way. What do you think it is? Could be multiple factors.
Yeah, I mean, we could both take a crack at that one. I mean, my view, a lot of it is there is the self-development piece and the self-awareness piece. Also, this is, since it's a free test and it's a substantive free test, and people get these results about who they are, and there's often this aha moment, I think that really strikes people. And the A, that it's not a charge, and then B, it's not like it's just kind of some minimal information that's not very useful. But people get these substantive results of their rank order of these character strengths that are in all human beings and that have been valued by philosophers and theologians and educators and psychologists throughout the century. So it's a very interesting thing to kind of get feedback on and to learn about oneself, because often people have never thought about themselves through the lens of these character strengths. Oftentimes, people get feedback on what's wrong and what their struggles are and how they could do better at work and their problems. And that's the way that their mind often goes toward, more of a negativity view of things. But to suddenly get feedback on these qualities that are best in them and that they can use those in so many different ways, that's striking thing. So people take the test and then they tell other people about it. And I think it just kind of, kind of builds from there.
In fact, if people are listening right now and they haven't done it, maybe they should take a little pause, go to viacharacter.org and take the test, and they may get more out of this than they would otherwise. But, I really would like to echo something Ryan has said. So often we focus on what's wrong with me. And I think particularly the people who are coming to the VIA website, they're searchers about themselves. They're interested about in who they are as a person. And so often that can be, what am I doing wrong? How come it's not coming together for me? Where are my problems? And this really says, but what are your strengths? Because those are the things that you're going to ultimately need to use to actually become a better person. So instead of focusing on those deficits, focus on what's strong in you and then build from there. And so I think sometimes people who have really been thinking of themselves in very negative ways take this and they see a different side of themselves as someone who does have parts of themselves that are really very valuable and that they can use in a way to help themselves and help the people around them.
Wow. Well, that's a very worthy goal, isn't it? Just wanted to take this moment to thank you all for your support of the podcast over the years. It's been a real privilege to do this podcast for you all for the past 4 years. It's been a real labor of love. If you'd like to further support the podcast, I wanted to let you know a few things you could do to help make it a better experience for you all. First, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the Psychology Podcast on iTunes. This would help make the show more prominent on iTunes and increase our listenership. I believe you can subscribe both on your iPhone and on your computer. Second, it'd be great if you could give the show a rating and review in iTunes. I definitely read all the reviews, and they're helpful to others who are thinking about giving the show a listen. Another thing you can do is donate something to the show. Even just the price of a cup of coffee would really help me continue to do this podcast for you all. To donate something, you can go to thepsychologypodcast.com and click on the link at the bottom that says Become a Sponsor. So thanks again for your incredible support of the show over the years. I do this show for you all because I truly love sharing my enthusiasm and love of the mind, brain, and creativity, and I really appreciate you joining me on this journey. Okay, now back to the show. Have you found, do you have, empirical evidence that knowledge does help people? You know what I mean? Other than, all the data we have on all the statistical analysis of the scale, what studies exist from an applied perspective showing that this self-knowledge does impact people positively in their lives? Is that a fair question?
Sure. I was deferring to Ryan because he actually did the book. So take it away, Ryan.
What do you mean he did the book? He wrote the book?
The character strength interventions book.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so that's kind of, some people say that's like the Bible of positive psychology activities or positive psychology interventions. But yeah, I mean, there's so many ways that this work is being applied in across contexts. I mean, you can go at it from the specific character strength and look at what activities have been shown to help people boost awareness and use of their gratitude or their teamwork or their curiosity, their love, their fairness, and so on. Or that you can also go at it from more of a general, wider scope perspective and look and see, well, let's turn to people's highest strengths, which are called in the field signature strengths. And if people can become more aware of those and use those more, what benefits come? And so there have been a number of randomized trials that have looked at that as an intervention, this intervention around signature strength. It's usually called use your signature strengths in new ways each day. And so the way the intervention goes is people take the VIA survey, they look at their top results, they choose one of their highest strengths. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be prudence, it could be creativity, it could be spirituality, it could be kindness, whatever it is. They choose one of their highest strengths, and then they use it in a different way each day, kind of consciously, mindfully each day. And what the studies are showing is that it can have long-term benefits by doing this activity per the instructions for 1 week. And by benefits, a recent meta-analysis showed that this activity boosted happiness, it boosts life satisfaction, it lowers depression, it enhances flourishing, and it even enhances the use of your strengths. So all these kind of benefits are emerging in the science. So it's very, very exciting. And just to make it even more practical for the listener. So if my highest strength is curiosity, let's say which is true for me, I might choose to use that in a different way each day. So it doesn't have to be anything dramatic. So with whatever strength the person chooses. So day one, I might use my curiosity in a new way by spending 5 minutes doing an internet search, exploring different sites. And then the next day, I might try one new food. And so I'm kind of exploring something. I'm pursuing novelty, pursuing something new and different. And then the next day, I might ask one coworker one new question that I've never asked them before. So, using your curiosity to ask that question. So that's the kind of the spirit of this particular exercise. And, you think you do it with any of these character strengths that are most core to who you are. So it's very promising and exciting.
Sounds it. Shall we go through some of the character strengths? And people can take the test for free on the VIA Institute website. What's the website address?
www.viacharacter.org. So VIA character.org.
You may get another couple million going to the website after this episode. Who knows?
Let's do it. Right.
But, maybe like as a preview, like we should go through some of the virtues. And maybe we'll talk about all 24 character strengths, but maybe you could just briefly go through the virtues. And by the way, also define what the difference between a virtue and a character strength is. What's the difference between virtue and character?
Sure. Yeah. So, the original book that introduced this whole model was actually called Character Strengths and Virtues. And the people who wrote that book, Chris Peterson and Marty Seligman, talked about both the idea of character strengths and virtues. And they had the way that they talked about those was that character strengths are these 24 dimensions that make up your positive personality, that define who you are as a positive person. But then, they were interested in this ancient idea of virtues. And I think it's one of the cool things about the model is that it both is very modern and psychological in that we're using kind of modern psychological research methods to develop this stuff, but it also draws on this 2,500-year-old literature on the nature of virtues. And when we're talking about virtues, we're really talking about kind of these broad elements of positivity at the social level, things that have been valued across cultures, across history. And these are kind of broader dimensions. So they talked about 6 virtues, and the way that they identified these 6 virtues was that they reviewed kind of basic moral texts from 7 different traditions. So we're talking about the Judeo-Christian tradition, Athenian Greek philosophy, Islam, Confucianism, Hinduism, 7 traditions altogether, and looked at kind of the basic moral texts for those traditions. And what they found was that there were 6 themes that popped up over and over again. And they called those wisdom and knowledge, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. And they said, look, you can find kind of resonance of these ideas in every one of these moral traditions to a greater or lesser extent. And so they said, if these are things that all moral traditions have valued, then shouldn't the character strengths, these 24 dimensions, kind of fit into these different virtues? And so they actually built a system where they said, for example, that bravery, your ability to stand up for yourself, is an aspect of courage. Gratitude and appreciation of beauty, they're part of feeling transcendence, which is sort of this sense of connectedness to the world. So in that way, they developed kind of a 2-level model of virtues being these kind of broad dimensions of are you someone who contributes culturally, socially to other people around you, and then the more specific 24 strengths underneath them. I should mention that actually research we've done more recently has reduced that from 6 to 3. And the 3 that we've been focusing on lately are called caring, which is your connection to people in the world, inquisitiveness, which is your interest in what's happening in the world, and then self-control, your ability to function effectively and control your emotions. And we found that 24 also fit pretty well under these 3 larger categories. And so with this new version of the VIA that we're talking about coming out in the next year or so, that you'll be able to get the scores both on the 6 original virtues, but also on these 3 new virtues.
Very cool. I guess it depends what level of specificity you're looking for.
That's right.
So, this is an interesting question that you raised with those three, because you are making the argument that those are the three main dimensions of the good person, right?
Right.
So is it possible to have a perfect character? Like, I've seen graphs, like three-dimensional plots of all the character strengths, and you see there's like two dimensions where character strengths tend to, in the general population, cluster into opposing sides. So there's a self-other dimension, and then am I totally blanking on the other? Do you know what the other dimension is? There's self-other, and there's another one.
Is it intellectual, heart and head?
Heart and mind?
Yes.
Intrapersonal.
Yes. I think that feels right.
That's the circumplex model.
Exactly. Yeah. The circumplex. You can plot it on circumplex. So, I'm looking at the circumplex right? Trade-offs among character strengths. Figure 6.3. The farther apart are two strengths, the less likely it is the same person habitually shows both. So focus on self versus focus of others, and heart and mind. So doesn't that suggest that in order for an individual to score extremely high in all three of those categories is kind of going against the natural trends in society? Like, to be that kind of person, you also have to be the kind of person who can think dialectically, right?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Sorry.
Sure. So I'm looking at this graph of the general population, and there are these very clear trade-offs. Like, you can't, like, in the general population, most people do not have all three. And if someone scores high on bravery, they tend to actually score lower on teamwork, for instance, or forgiveness. Like, these things are on different spectrums. So to make the case that the good person is one who scores high on these three categories seems to suggest to me that that's going to be a very, very statistical improbability. Like, that person is going to be very rare in the general population.
I don't think that necessarily is true. I think that, in fact, if one of the things that's interesting about the three dimensions is that they're pretty unrelated to each other. So you have some people who are high on all three, some people who are high on one and low on two, on two. You have all the different possible combinations. But I think, let's move away from the statistics for a minute, because I kind of like your original question better, which is there such a thing as a good person? And it actually is. What I think is really neat about that question is that we're looking at it as a research question, but it's a question that philosophers have been asking themselves about, and theologians have been asking themselves for thousands of years now. And I think the right answer is there are people who are better than others, but to the person who thinks that they are there is not being inquisitive enough. They're not using those more intellectual strengths enough, that there are always ways that we can improve. The reality is that the temptation to do things that are selfish or lazy or not really, assuming that we know what's right rather than being questioning, those tendencies are always there for us. And so I don't think you ever become a really virtuous person. I think you become someone who is constantly struggling to become a virtuous person. And then that's a lifelong journey. And I think it's a great one.
And just to build off of that, it's really up to each person to think about this and wonder, what is it best for me to strive for balance across the three virtues, across the six virtues, across those four quadrants of head, heart, intrapersonal? Is the idea to try to find a balance? Like, I have some strengths that are more heart-based that I'm strong in, some that I'm mind-based in, some that are more intra, some that are more interpersonal, or other people might say, no, I'm really happy that I'm pretty strong in the mind strengths, and I'm just going to continue to just be me and just be authentically me and bring that forth as strong as I can. I can do good for the world by just being very strong with my mind-oriented strengths and not necessarily focus on the interpersonal or the others as much, although they'll probably come along for the ride if I'm really strong with my particular category. And then there might be another person that says, no, I'm going to try to strive to build up most of these strengths. They all kind of matter to me. There has been some research that shows that higher total raw scores on the VIA survey, so kind of cutting across all the strengths, is associated with greater well-being. So there's maybe a little bit of an argument to try to develop all of them. Although, at the same time, that can be intimidating to somebody that's just come upon these, and suddenly we're saying, you got to suddenly use 24 strengths. So you start a little bit simpler, and you start with your highest strengths, and you start with a couple that you're curious about, and then you kind of go from there. And then I also wondered, Bob, if you would share actually about that you've done 1 or 2 studies on exemplars and finding that there really isn't exemplars
Yeah, I
as
love that
a
research.
category of character in the world. I mean, could you share a little bit about that?
Are you talking about the? Oh, yes. I'm sorry. It took me a second.
Yeah, you didn't. I don't think you used the
That's
word
when you know you've done
exemplars.
too many
But
studies. It's like, what are you talking about?
I know. I know that study. I love that study.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an old tradition. It actually starts with Aristotle of talking about the virtuous, as if there's this group of people out there who are really, like have become something different from everybody else in terms of how virtuous they are. And I really was interested in that idea because it is something that you see in a whole bunch of different cultures, this idea of to use the term from the Greeks, the virtuous person. And so one of the things that's neat is that because so many people have completed the questionnaire, we can do these studies with huge numbers of people, and we can really tease out things that are so small that usually they would be hard to find. And we've done a couple of studies now where we've actually used their methods that can identify, are there subgroups of people within a larger group? And so far, we haven't found anything like that. And we've done 2 studies now. And it's a very hard area of research to do. I'm not going to say that, this is definitely the truth here, that you don't have such a thing as the virtuous person. But I think it makes more sense to think in terms of more or less virtuous. That is, more of a person who focuses on the good for themselves and others at the same time versus less so. And I think that idea bothers some people, that they want role models. They want people who are,
Perfect.
exceptional.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that, even within that idea of there are people who are more or less, there can be people who are role models in that. But the idea that there are people who reach a point where they're virtuous and they don't have to work anymore, I actually think that's a bad idea. And I think it's
Yeah.
something that we have fallen back on because it's something we wish is true. But I sort of like the idea that we're all struggling all the time to be as virtuous as we can be.
And that links great with what we were saying earlier around if somebody thinks that they have reached this pinnacle of virtue or of goodness, then by definition they're not, because they're then not bringing forth much humility, which is another one of the character strengths.
Right.
So it's kind of an impossibility in that sense. It's kind of like the idea if there's that name of that book and popular phrase, if you meet the Buddha on the side of the road, kill him. So it's the kind of the same idea if somebody is claiming that, and that there isn't that perfect model in that sense. So instead, I think to make this all practical, it all comes down to we can discover moments of virtue. We could discover moments of character strength, and we could create lots and lots of those moments. We could put the moments together and create a longer experience. But there's in my opinion, there's no perfect virtuous person at work. There's no perfect virtuous person as a parent. Anybody that's a parent knows that's exactly true. There's no perfectly virtuous person as a teacher or as a psychologist or whoever. But all those people can, even people that veer more toward the negative and do a lot of bad things, all of those people can move toward finding more moments of virtue, more moments of character strength, where they're trying to do more good for other people or for the world. So that feels to me like a reachable piece that we can all move toward.
So thank you for saying that. I just thought of how I want to write an article now for my column at Scientific American with the title, "There Are No Perfectly Virtuous People." It's a really cool.
Right.
I've been thinking about this for a while because I've really been conducting some of my own research on the light versus dark triad of personality, and we have a paper coming out on that soon. But just thinking about personality traits in particular, not as these fixed, completely stable traits, but I really like thinking of it like William Fleason and his colleagues have been thinking about personality as there's a lot of converging evidence now, including like William Fleason's research, suggesting that we should just think of personality as density distributions throughout the course of our day. or like the virtuous personality isn't always they show all levels from 1 to 5 throughout the course of the day. Their frequency distribution is much, much more 5s and 4s than 1s and 2s, whereas the person who's low. So we should think about this as more continuous density distributions between individuals, not as discrete categories.
Yes, and you can apply that thinking to Gandhi or to Mother Teresa. I mean, Mother Teresa's recent writings. I mean, most people would see Mother Teresa as this great virtuous person, in which she is a role model for many virtues. She's a role model for kindness and a role model for humility and a role model for leadership. And we can learn a lot by seeing her as a role model. But to see her as the perfect virtuous person would be a mistake, and she would actually, if she was alive, would say that's a mistake, and would agree more with what you're saying, what Fleeson talks about with density distributions around these traits, where she has many different moments of kindness and virtue and compassion and so on, but has her own struggles, which she documents in her journals and so on. So you could apply that same thinking to Gandhi or a world leader that we really admire, that kind of thing.
To piggyback on something Brian was saying, he mentioned that old book about, if you see the Buddha by the side of the road, kill him. And maybe we're getting to the point where the real title should be, There Is No Buddha.
Now, that's a very interesting idea. What would you mean by that? Because there was a Buddha.
Well, there was a guy who, actually, we don't even know if it's true, to be honest, but there was a guy that we think existed who got called the Buddha. But in terms of, did he actually achieve Buddhahood? I think that there's a way in which believing that it is possible to achieve that level is not necessarily what we want to do. That maybe we want to think about it as a constant struggle for Buddhahood, that it's a constant movement towards being a good person, because the day that you become kind of complacent that you're there is the day that you lose it.
That's very interesting. Like, it's never like a state that you permanently achieve.
That's right. It is always a movement towards something that you will never achieve.
I like that. I like that a lot. I mean, that's what the point of growth is. Growth, if it's not like you stop growing psychologically. I mean, you made physically.
I think that's all. It's
but
all
right. Yeah.
It's all rightly aligned with what I think we're all saying. And another sort of a corollary to all of that is a kind of another adage in the Buddhist literature, where after the Enlightenment, you do the dishes or you do the laundry. So after you have this great virtuous experience, you did a great, wonderful acts of kindness for somebody that was really suffering, or you did some great volunteer work, or you're, whatever character strength you were expressing very strongly, or maybe you had a wonderful spiritual experience where you offer a profound meaning, sense of meaning with the universe, sense of oneness or something. But then still, you have to go back and do the dishes. You have to go back and do the laundry. You have to go back and do the humdrum of daily life. It's not like you've reached this enlightenment and that just carries through the rest of life. It's still, we get back to our routines, and then maybe we'll get back to that moment of that oneness or that compassion 7 days from now or 20 days from now. So there is that kind of vacillation that happens.
Good. So I like that you made that point. Another aspect that I teach my students is how some strengths may develop over time or others may weaken. If you look at development trajectories of older adults and youth, there seem to be some character strengths that younger populations tend to show more of than adults. And I'm looking at a graph of that right now. I guess, what is it? Youth show more curiosity, creativity, love, humor, gratitude, kindness, fairness, whereas older individuals tend to show more forgiveness, religiousness, prudence, self-regulation. I guess they're more boring. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, basically.
Sorry.
As an older adult, I am willing to accept that.
So I thought that it was interesting. There tend to be some developmental trends. So I'm just really thinking about just what I think about this notion of, is there of us as scientists saying that a certain combination of strengths is a good person. And I'd like to push back on that because I'm just not 100% convinced yet about that. And I think it feels like it's at odds with the spirit of the whole VIA Institute, which is like more about authenticity. It's like, find out what your top 3 are and how can you harness those in the best ways without putting any pressure that like your top 3 like deviates from what the profile of the best or goodness is. So, in the spirit of friendship scholarly debate. I just want to put forward that I don't know if I'm 100% comfortable with this notion of we're going to take a certain combination of these strengths and refer to that as, because that seems more subjective than the objective science. What do you make of that?
Just to understand the question, are you saying that when you say combination of character strengths, are you referring to the 24 as a combination, as a unit, or are you saying subsets within there?
So the three factors that emerge,
Right. Yeah.
like I just keep thinking about this, and I've talked to Robert about this before. He thinks that the caring part might be the most fundamental one when it comes to goodness. Like I tend to think of, self-actualization, people self-actualize in their own ways. Like it seems to me like the spirit of the whole V Institute was not saying that there is, if you are to be toward a good person, you need to be higher in these three categories. I mean, what if you're just you're a physicist, and you care and love deeply the work you do, the science. You're not an uncaring person, but you're just not terribly interested in social justice issues. It's just not something you're interested in. Like you're really interested in, the science or
Inquiry,
inquiry, exploration. Like you're deviating from being a good person, and I'm just wondering about this.
So I don't think we're saying that at all, in my opinion. So the way I would frame it is that, and we say this phrase a lot, that all 24 of the character strengths matter. And it might just be that our own unique signature strengths, whether those are under the caring dimension or humanity dimension or whatever dimension they're in, that those unique highest signature strengths might matter the most. Okay. So whenever I'm working with somebody or teaching this, I always have both those principles simultaneously operating in my mind, that all 24 strengths matter because we all have all of them. We have developed them to some degree. We have potential or capacity to develop them more. But then that there's the parts that are most uniquely you, again, whether they're caring based or self-regulation based or whatever, that might be what's most important for you in order to forge better relationships or to achieve more in life or to be more engaged. So it's kind of a matter of having both of those together in that sense.
Let me respond to that as well, because I think you're in part you're reacting to some things that I have done in kind of casual presentation situations, which is to refer to the good person. And, and I get pushback on it, which is fine, that, kind of the opposite of good is bad. And so maybe a better way to say it is that for a person to really be maximally virtuous, there we're talking about not necessarily the perfect person, but someone who really is contributing in remarkable ways, that it does have to have elements of all three. That being said, if you go through life not hurting people and really focus on those strengths that are important to you, you're going to be a good person, and you're going to be someone who contributes and someone who really is valuable to those around them. So the message here, it depends what you're going for. If I think it's really valuable to, as part of who you are as a person, to be striving all the time to be better than who you are. I mean, that's just valuable to me. And so I like to push myself in ways that I haven't considered before. But there are different ways of being someone who really is important to other people, who works well, who, does well in those two areas of love and work that are kind of the essence of what makes us someone of value. And you can achieve that through any combination of the strengths that you see as important to you.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And let me just throw another twist on it. If I can ask you, Scott, a very, very quick question. Name one positive outcome that you really care about, something like, better health, achievement, engagement, just something real quick.
Authenticity.
Yeah.
Integrity.
Authenticity and integrity. So there's kind of two pathways then. If somebody is saying, hey, two general pathways in my mind. If someone's saying, I want this outcome of greater authenticity in my life, or I'm wanting to build, whatever it is, build more achievement in my life, health, and so on. So one pathway might be to look, what does the science say in terms of which character strengths are most connected with authenticity or that cause authenticity and so on. And my guess, I don't know of really studies that have looked at that, but my guess is there would be, a handful of strengths that would really show up strong. So, using your honesty strength a little bit more, maybe using your bravery strength a little bit more, maybe your perseverance strength a little bit more. Let's just say it's those three. So then one pathway to build more authenticity could be to look at those three correlates or those three causative elements for boosting those three up to build greater authenticity. So that would be one pathway. And then another pathway would be to say, okay, well, Scott, let's look to your highest strengths already, those strengths that are most uniquely you, whatever those top 5 or 6 or 7 are, and let's work on just expanding those, making sure that you're really bringing those forth in all the different areas of your life in a good way, a strong way, a balanced way, and that's the signature strength approach. So both of those pathways, I think, are equally valid and could help you for that ultimate goal of building greater authenticity, but yet it's involving very different combinations of strengths. And it would be then unique to each person. So because each person's signature strength combination is going to be different. I don't know if that makes sense. But
you've given me so much food for thought. I love when my brain lights up like it is right now. So, okay, caring, inquisitiveness, and self-control. So I do hear what both you're saying, and it makes me think that what I'm reacting to is this, maybe more the methodology, we look at these things as correlations, like the higher you are on these three categories, the more likely you are. But maybe I feel like it's just more nuanced than that. Like maybe it's better to think in terms of thresholds than linear effects. Like let's say you're a physicist and I guess I don't want to stereotype physicists because I know a lot of physicists who are very caring people, but I'm just saying like your inquisitiveness is like 2 standard deviations above the mean. Let's say your caring is, like about average, your self-control is about average. I feel like with these thresholds, like you can still be a very, very good person. Like I guess I'm reacting to this like linear effect idea.
Sure. And like I said, when I've used the term good, which I actually don't use in any of my writings, I just use that kind of casually. I don't necessarily mean that if you're not like an exceptional person, then you're a bad person. It's just that I think to achieve kind of let's say maybe that would be what we might refer to as the person who's exceptional, who does all of those things really well and considers them all the time in all areas of their lives.
It's an interesting conceptualization of exceptional, like other researchers in the high performance field think of exceptional. So you mean exceptional character?
Yes. Exceptional character.
Yeah, gotcha. It's cool. I'm trying to like sort all this stuff out on the spot.
Well, we're kind of working our way through this as we speak too. So
yeah, no, it's fun. It's really fun to think this through because like some people may think of exceptionality as like high performance or like those who are dominating the competition or producing like brilliant exceptional artist, a musician who's selling. The metric there is albums sold. It's not like how much does that person care about others. Although, nowadays in this age of calling out lots of abuses, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. If you look back originally, the Greek word for virtue, because virtue is actually a Latin word, and the Greek word arete was really about being exceptional. And it was not about being just a typical person. It was about really striving for something exceptional. But as it became part of philosophy, it kind of shifted. Like, there were people who had arete as, fighters or, as soldiers, as, people with a bow and arrow had arete. But as it became part of philosophy, it became about being exceptional in character, being broad. And so, maybe that's a good way to think about this kind of tension that we're talking about here, is that in terms of the 24 character strengths, what's really important is developing you as a person, because character is about you as a person. And so, it's really about looking at what your particular strengths are, identifying them, using them more effectively, thinking of how you can use your strengths in ways that are helpful to you and to those around you. But then when you get into the area of virtue, it's really about an issue of how do you become a better person, a more exceptional person. So I think there's sort of a tension between the two different levels that I find kind of interesting.
I find it totally fascinating as well. Let's end this program by just briefly talking about the Strengths Builder program you both developed and not spill all the beans. We just want to whet the appetite so people will buy the book, right? I know you won't disagree with that spirit. So you have 4 different aspects of this program, a 4-step program. Could you just go through the 4 steps and maybe just like give an example for one of the steps, how people can have more of that in their life, their daily life?
Sure, if I could start that. Just to set it up, just prior to the Strength Builder program, the book, The Power of Character Strengths, goes through each of the 24 character strengths that Bob and I and Scott are all talking about here, and really is trying to lay out the what, the why, and the how of each of these character strengths. And in the how is where we spend the most attention. So where we look at the overuse and underuse of the strength, the optimal use of the strength, what case example for each strength, questions that you would ask to build that strength, how you can take action at work, in your community, in your relationships, and so on. So that's kind of the centerpiece of the book. And then that all culminates to what you're asking about, Scott, the Strength Builder program, this 4-step program, which in a nutshell, the 4 steps are, step 1 is around building up our initial skill with this common language of strengths. So by doing strength spotting. So we practice spotting strengths in ourselves and in others. Step 2 gets into the individual noticing and naming and exploring their highest strengths, so their signature strengths, which we talked about here. The next step involves bringing our strengths to a problem, to a stressor, to a difficulty, to a life challenge, and kind of exploring how we can use our strengths to really see the problem in a different way and to really use the strengths in ways that we maybe never have thought of to be able to overcome that problem. And then the last step, last step or week 4, if people are doing like 1 step a week, the last step is around making strengths a habit, which is where we center this work around goal setting and taking action for ourselves that really is going to be meaningful for us. So anything you'd add there, Bob?
Yeah, Ryan, I think that's a really great outline of the Strengths Builder. And what I think is really important about it, to add to that, is that can sound kind of global and abstract, and we want this to be a practical tool people can use once they've completed the VIA questionnaire, that they can go through these steps and actually build their strengths and build how they, and when I say build your strengths, I mean actually think about and develop new ways of using your strengths or using them more effectively. And so as we go through Strengths Builder in the book, we offer a lot of practical examples and kind of concrete thoughts about how you can go through each of these steps. So we really want this to be something that people feel like they can actually do this for themselves and make something personal out of each of these 4 steps.
I love that. Do you know what my favorite one is? What my favorite step is?
What's that?
I'm going to be personal here a second. I love spotting strengths in others. Like to me, I think I get more enjoyment out of that than this obsessive like self-knowledge all the time. I find it exhausting sometimes to be so introspective. Sometimes it's nice to get outside of myself and try to see the best in others. Do you resonate with that at all?
There's actually some character education programs that are done in schools that are almost nothing but strength spotting. Like
Nice.
just, what is this other, what are the strengths of the other people in the class? And sometimes I've worked a little bit with schools around this, and I mean sometimes like you'll see these kids who are just like, really, everybody thinks of me that way? That's so amazing. And what's nice is that none of these are deficit issues. So you're always saying something that is about that person as a positive. And to have other people in class say, I think you're a really humble person, or I think you're amazing at using humor in situations that are where everybody's really having a tough time, or that you have incredible leadership ability. Like people get a new sense of who they are that I think can be really exciting.
I love that.
And you're not alone, Scott. When we ask people, do they find it easier to spot strengths in themselves or spot strengths in others? I would say between 90 and 95% of people will say it's easier to spot strengths in other people. And so that's actually one of the reasons why it's the first step, because it's a step that people naturally gravitate to. They enjoy it. They feel like they're making a positive impact on other people. And it's kind of fun to be able to look at the world through that lens. And if I can spot strengths in you, Scott, so during this interview here,
what are my strengths?
Certainly we could go through probably over 20 or so, but I certainly see hearing, a lot of, the obvious here with an interviewer, curiosity, but also a lot of love of learning. We are really wanting to delve deep into the knowledge and explore this work more closely. So those are two that really stood out to me most here.
Yeah. Well, and let me piggyback on that. I really enjoyed the fact that you gave us pushback on some of our ideas. That was excellent.
What would that character strength be?
I think that's love of learning and a little bit of bravery or honesty.
Honesty,
judgment, critical thinking, to be able to kind of look at things from a different angle, different details.
I love it. Well, I can tell you my top 3 character strengths were creativity, curiosity, and humor. So I think creativity was number 1, curiosity was number 2. So yeah, curiosity, love learning, I think they're similar. Hey, thank you so much. I do want to ask kind of this final question because I want to make sure for our listeners, this idea of character strengths and learning your character strengths, is it for everyone? Sometimes you hear criticisms of positive psychology that it really is, kind of the upper classes, like there's kind of like have the opportunities. It's a luxury to even look at your character strengths. Can you address that at all? Like, is this for everyone, this program?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think we both probably want to respond to this one. If I can start, Bob, well, first let me just address the kind of the class, the class kind of statement, around, I mean, we've done a lot of work with people maybe of lower socioeconomic status, been more disadvantaged statuses, at-risk youth, gone into like boys and girls clubs, like in the region where I'm in here in Cincinnati, and in schools that don't have as much money, public schools and so on. And this work is an absolute home run in these situations, because if anything, it's needed almost more in these situations, because in a lot of those situations, people are just not giving that kind of feedback about, in terms of strength spotting or helping an individual, a young child, or even an adult to uncover their best qualities and to bring them forward in life. But clearly they have been. Clearly they've been living a life and overcoming lots of adversity and using their character strengths. It's just that nobody has pointed that out to them to where they can then more mindfully bring them forth more in their life. So absolutely, this is for... So my answer is yes, it's for everybody in that sense, and partly because, who doesn't have these character strengths? I mean, these character strengths are part of all of us, and we can bring them forth to improve our life in so many different ways. So, yeah, I would say yes to that.
Yeah, and if I can piggyback on what Ryan is saying, I think when I've read those criticisms, it's along the lines of, well, the reason that you're not succeeding in life is because you don't have enough self-regulation. And that's the opposite of what we're looking at. I mean, the whole point is to not be focusing on people's deficits, but to focus on their strengths. Programs based on the 24 character strengths, they're being used in Africa. I'm involved with a program in Zambia where they're using this in over 50 middle schools in the U.S. that are almost exclusively in low socioeconomic status areas with a lot of kids from disadvantaged populations. What is really neat about it is that many times this is the first time that there's been a real formal effort to focus on kids' strengths rather than their deficits. So I know of guidance counselors who have said, this has changed the way I deal with kids, because now when a kid, for example, is having problems, instead of it being, you got to do better, or, what's your problem here? It's, maybe you need to balance this strength with this other strength, or how can you use your strength here to help you with this problem? And it really is so much more looking at people as positive beings than people who are messed up, or have failed in some way. And I've seen kids just come to light thinking about their strengths for the first time ever. And these are kids who are coming from backgrounds where there has been an awful lot of focus on you can be a strong person. And so I think that's a complete error if this is done the right way.
Thank you so much for addressing that, and for all the really important work you're doing to help people spot the best in themselves and others.
Well,
I really enjoyed the chat today.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks so much, Scott.
Thanks for listening to the Psychology Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to react in some way to something you heard, I encourage you to join in the discussion at thepsychologypodcast.com. That's thepsychologypodcast.com. Also, please add a rating and review of The Psychology Podcast on iTunes. Thanks for being such a great supporter of the podcast, and tune in next time for more on the mind, brain, behavior, and creativity.